Hello, I'm Mark Martinez, and I really like this car. In fact, he's the only race car to be sponsored by Martin Luther. This is Lightning McQueen, and prior to his breakout on the world stage, he was a practicing monk for 14 years. Why is this relevant? Find out today. This is Student-Led World History. Today, we're going to talk about the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment, and also the causation between these two events. Let's jump in. The Protestant Reformation, in retrospect, looks like it was a long time coming. Certain practices of the Catholic Church, like selling indulgences and appointing certain people as bishops, were a bit questionable. But one man of the moment took a metaphorical swing at the power of the Catholic Church, and it's everybody's favorite great-grandfather of Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther. That was a lie, by the way. Martin Luther started out as a monk on a mission. He eventually published his 95 Theses, believed to have been nailed to a church door. These theses voiced 95 grievances against the Catholic Church. We're not going to get into all of these, but these took pretty big shots at the station of the Pope and the Church's practices. But above all, it professed the doctrine of salvation by faith over works. And these ideas spread like peanut butter, which is to say that they didn't spread evenly over different places. Now, Martin Luther lived in the Holy Roman Empire, which was a hot mess. The Holy Roman Empire was a decentralized nation in the middle of Europe, with many autonomous little countries inside of it. And despite its size, it was very weak when compared to France or the Ottoman. And Lutheranism, the first branch of Protestantism, was a pretty big hit in some of these kingdoms, but not so much in others. And these ideas spread well beyond the Holy Roman hot mess, but notably across the north of Europe, especially to England, France, and Scandinavia. The official religion of England became Anglicanism, a Protestant sect. And in France, though the majority remained Catholic, there was a sizable minority called Huguenots, who were largely Calvinist. What's Calvinism? Well, John Calvinism founded Calvinism as a branch of Protestantism who agreed with Luther largely on the point of salvation by faith over works, however disagreed on some points that are relatively small for what we're talking about today. So as you can imagine, some Catholics got their feathers pretty ruffled by all this brouhaha. This triggered something called the Catholic or Counter-Reformation. Here's an accurate depiction of how that went. Hey, Mr. Pope. Well, hello, how may I help you? Well, there are these people called Protestants, and they're kind of doing a reformation. I know, we'll have our own reformation. Okay, so what should we change? Nothing. Get the Ninja Turtles on the phone. One of the nations which strongly supported the Counter-Reformation was Spain. Charles V, a Spanish king who inherited this massive chunk of land, was named Holy Roman Emperor and sought to suppress the Protestants' momentum. This, however, failed, and he was forced to abdicate, splitting up this meaty land chunk. So the Counter-Reformation manifested itself in a whole lot of religious tension. This eventually boiled over, and the princes in the Holy Roman Empire's ability to determine whether they were Protestant, which was granted in the Peace of Augsburg, was taken away by Ferdinand the Tooth. This led to the 30 Years' War, and in short, a whole lot of nations joined in, even the Ottoman, who were not Christians, and the war ended up being a whole lot more about politics than religion. With the Pope's power under question, many monarchs took it upon themselves to rule their realms with absolute might, and during the 17th and 18th centuries, a continuation of the belief in the divine right of kings led to Europe seeing a whole lot of absolute monarchies. Perhaps the most famous of these monarchs was Louis the XIV, the Sun King, who was attributed with the phrase "L'État c'est moi," or "I am the state." He also had some really nice calves. Louis ruled France while the kingdom prospered from its American colonies, and as many kings do, bought gold and fought wars with this money. That gold went to the Palace of Versailles, which is pretty cool. The palace did two things. First, it proved the king's power to the peasantry. This effect can be seen from the Mughal Taj Mahal to the Forbidden City. The second was that it flexed on the aristocracy and distracted them from the aforementioned wars. Absolute monarchy could also be seen in France's rival, England. Charles I used his power to circumvent Parliament and tax the heck out of his people. However, Charlie didn't have a fancy building to wow his subjects, so they revolted in what would be known as the English Civil War, and by the end of which, Charlie lost his mind, literally, and Parliament seized control of the government. Another absolute monarch who was a bit more successful was Peter the Great. Pete, through a series of reforms, westernized Russia through spreading education and getting better technology. Enlightenment. The turmoil of Europe following the 30 Years' War spawned a whole lot of new philosophical ideas, which would coalesce into what we would know as the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was an intellectual and political movement that developed in the 18th century. It was defined by the works of many new philosophers. Hobbes argued for powerful monarchs in Leviathan, John Locke advocated for universal liberty, at least for white people, and Adam Smith believed that mercantilism wasn't necessary because of an invisible hand that would come in and regulate the markets in the favor of the consumer. Wait, ow! Anyway, a common thread between these thinkers was that government should change, and more people should get more power. And another side of the Enlightenment movement was the rise of tolerance. This was exemplified by Voltaire, who advocated for tolerant governments in spite of religion. Many of these philosophers were wealthy. You need to have enough time to philosophize, so they viewed a lot of institutions favorably, not the least of these being slavery. Obsession with science was another big part of the Enlightenment, and many new rational thinkers popularized modern scientific theories. This push for new technological and scientific innovations led to a lot of European states rapidly developing technology, and this big sciencey blob came to be known as the Scientific Revolution. This saw the development of modern concepts in mathematics, physics, chemistry, astronomy, and biology, and saw the application of many of these ideas in the social and political realm. This would come to impact how a state saw itself in relationship to its subjects and be a staple of imperialistic ideology. And as I previously mentioned, in order to be a philosopher, you would have to have some tortellini in your tummy, or at least have some pretty powerful friends. And who could have more pizza in their palace than monarchs? The kings and queens of Europe who justified their rules with Enlightenment philosophy would come to be known as the creatively and aptly named Enlightenment Monarchs. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would philosophers support absolute monarchs if they were, like, absolute? And this brings us to the biggest difference between absolute monarchs and Enlightenment monarchs: the justification. While absolute monarchs saw themselves as being appointed by God to rule the state, Enlightenment monarchs thought they should rule because they were cool and supported Enlightenment ideas. And an example of these Enlightenment kings was Frederick the Cool of Prussia, who modernized Prussia's bureaucracy, military, and judicial systems. But what the heck is Prussia? I would have been asking myself that a month ago. Well, Prussia was a centralized state in northern Germany. As the Holy Roman Empire became weaker, Prussia became stronger. Prussia became the nation that spearheaded German unification, and this all started with Freddy. Frederick viewed himself as a servant to the state and made the kingdom much more religiously tolerant. This tolerance, however, did revolve around the segregation of religious minorities. Remember, tolerance does not mean acceptance. One of Frederick von Hohenzollern's contemporaries was Catherine the Cool. She served as a sovereign of Russia for 30 years and continued Peter's westernization efforts. Catherine ruled Russia during a time of great expansion. She used diplomacy and the vast Russian army to partition Poland, conquer Crimea, and annex Alaska. But territorial expansion is a through line in early modern Russian history. What makes Catherine more unique is her pursuit of urbanization and establishmentation of new Russian cities. And in a manner similar to Frederick, Catherine reformed the bureaucracy and gave power to the nobles that were closer to her. But what made Catherine an Enlightenment monarch? Well, she attempted to make Russia more democratic by designing a legislative committee composed of members of all social classes. This was outlined in the Instructions for the Guidance of the Assembly, or nakaz. This document was derivative of French philosophers. However, the Grand Commission failed to institute any real change in the empire. Despite this, Catherine managed to institute many reforms present in the nakaz, like spreading Western-styled education. And in spite of her Enlightenment philosophy, Russia's political and social structure was still dominated by serfdom. This underlines a deep hypocrisy within Enlightenment thought and foreshadows the coming of an age of revolution and nationalism. Ultimately, when we look at the Enlightenment, we have to take into perspective who gets to write the stories. That's everything you need to know about the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment from 1600 to 1800. Tune in next time where we're going to talk about political revolutions, but until then, please subscribe, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.